There is no problem facing the American society today which the president or governor or in any part of America would not require an intellectual committee for, which is that whenever that problem arises, you already know who and who will have the problem. If there was a problem with Esa, my own dialect of the Edo language, in America, they would have an expert somewhere in America, and they know who to pick for a solution.
But these intellectuals, they are not ordinary people like you and I. I want to believe that they should be able to use their intellect to be able to put themselves in the front.
I like that very point you've just made. But the point is simply this. I write books. I know that Nigerians do not buy books. And I know that when people are not appreciated, there's a tendency for them to move into other areas. I am one of those, perhaps, silly or shall we say pig-headed Nigerians who will not abandon what they know how to do. When I say I write books, that is what I do. I actually brought these books with me. They are books that I have written. Taking Nigeria Seriously is a book of more than 560 pages. This conference must be different. It's a book I wrote on the national conference that has just taken place. That is, I wrote it before the conference, tried to use it to influence some people who were there, and that is what most Nigerian intellectuals do. They try to influence what goes on.
Okay, Odia, I mean, I didn't expect anything less when we were tapping you for this conversation. As I said, we're going to have a quartet of discussants. We are here with Odia Ofebo in our Abu. But we are now going over to the Enugu Network Center, where we will be joined by Professor Boniface Egboka. Yes, we can see him right there on your screen. Professor Egboka, former Vice Chancellor, Nnamdi Azikiwe University, Awka. And by the way, Professor Egboka is also a very solid intellectual. For persons who do not know, he ran Nnamdi Azikiwe University, and for 8 years, while other schools were closing and reopening, Nnamdi Azikiwe University remained open. If you went in there for a 4-year program, you graduated in 4 years. If you went there for 5 years, you graduated in 5 years, provided you satisfied the requirements for the award of your qualification. Professor Egboka, I'd like to welcome you to Good Morning Nigeria.
And good morning to Nigeria.
But just as well, we're sure that you've been listening to the comments made by our guest right with us here in Abuja, Mr. Odia Ofebo, namely taking the historical sweeps of our independence struggle, Nnamdi Azikiwe, and then what eventually happened to the and why the intellectual class will appear to be in a recession in the current dispensation.
I do appreciate the comments of my comrade Odia Ofebo. Met in many places. The issue of intellectuals in Nigerian leadership positions is a discourse that is very, very important for our people. Many times, Nigerians bang on universities and the university system. We first have to really understand what is an intellectual, what is intellectual leadership, and so on and so forth. We find out that intellectuals may be found, can be found, will be found, are found in many parts of this country, in many professional areas and ethics. An intellectual is somebody who is fairly well educated, looks at problems analytically, engages in studies and scientific evaluation of issues and events that involve his social system, his environment, and exposes them to public discourse. And eventually, those his exposures make contributions, positive contributions for the public development, and the public opinion accepts and approves that. Nigeria is filled with so many of such intellectuals. They are not found only in the universities. And when we say well-educated, it doesn't mean the person has to be in the university or must have gone to the university. We have intellectuals, people who are deep thinkers, who are philosophers, who never went to universities, who do not have PhD. You find them all over this country. As in the background you explained, they are bound in Nigeria. The pre-independence intellectuals and their leadership, they tried to do well for the public. Their political arrangements were fairly well focused. As stated for Bafemi Awolowo, Ahmadu Bello, and Nnamdi Azikiwe and Okpara, they did well to try to provide some credible leadership. Unfortunately, their leaderships were not really national, except the efforts of Dr. Nnamdi Azikiwe, who had a national outlook. Bafemi Awolowo had a Western orientation. Ahmadu Bello was for the North, the East. Azikiwe eventually, after he lost an election in Western region, came back to the East and played the same tone. This, unfortunately, despite the efforts of people like Wole Soyinka and Chinua Achebe and others, drove this country into a tenacious war, Nigeria-Biafra war. If our intellectual leadership was excellent and their activities well accepted those days, we would not have entered into that dangerous war. Unfortunately, after that war, the military had already taken over. And even though you have intellectuals in the military domain, their intellectualism are usually militarily oriented. They believe in the force of argument, not argument of force. As a result, the intellectual position became disoriented as a result of the military interaction. And then the military went for so long and eventually handed to a military man who became a civilian, Chief Obasanjo. Again, military tactics was applied in government. And now intellectuals in the universities, in the business domain, in politics, they suffered quite a lot. Not only during the military regime, but during the government of the civilian military government that emerged. The position has somehow changed in the past 7 to 8 years of this government, and there have been improvements. One can see the way the present government tries to handle issues. People are consulted. The government allows itself to be criticized, even to be harangued, to be manhandled, and still maintains the cool head, owing to the nature of the leadership from Yar'Adua to President Goodluck Jonathan. So intellectuals abound all over this country. You have them in the business world, you have them among politicians, although there are fewer among the politicians. You have many of them in the universities, and as Dr. Femon said, some of those in the universities are quasi-intellectuals, but most of them are intellectuals. But do we take the idea by them? Sometimes the ideas are given and they are taken. Sometimes you appoint these intellectuals in governance as commissioners, as ministers. They abandon their intellectualism and follow the trend. So the leadership parameters and barometers in the Nigerian system of politics and national development have been a sort of rigmarole. We have very good intellectuals, but they require very serious encouragements. Let me tell you that Nigerian universities are doing very well. I disagree with Audio about his comments on Nigerian universities. From my experience over the years since I joined the Nnamdi Azikiwe University from the ASUTEC days, despite all the environmental problems, socio-economic problems that besiege the nation, which does not go away from affecting universities, Nigerian universities have been doing very well. As you did introduce earlier in your background pronouncements, Nnamdi Azikiwe University, which is modeled towards the behavioral pattern of late Dr. Azikiwe, the whole of Onitsha, has been trying to do its best among community of universities, not only in Nigeria, but in the world. They are very sound professors. We've been able to provide services to the Anambra State government and even to the country, where our professors and lecturers have been called on national assignments, and they have been performing. Many of our graduate products who become very active, aggressive intellectuals in various domains, in the justice domain, in the mass communication area, in banking and finance, in politics, and so on. Many of those our products have been doing very well. So Nigerian universities have been trying. The activities of ASU have been very well known, and they have many a time tried to bring their forces to bear on government to try to improve the funding and management patterns of Nigerian universities.
Okay, Prof, just two quick questions, and then I would like you to react to the fact. From all what you said, I took away something. You said Nigerian universities are doing very well, and you did emphasize that. And if our universities are doing so well, why do we have the problem of our graduates? What we hear these days are they are not employable. When you come out from the university, the various employers, we still have to give them very rigorous training before they can find those that can fit what they want them for. And then the other issue is our academicians. Many of them now seem to be abandoning their major pursuit, because they have to survive. They have to go into contracts. They have to go into other things. Yes. And then the basic thing they're supposed to be doing, research, serious academic work, there is the issue. Are they still into this business of academics?
Thank you very much for your intellectually based critique. Graduates are not doing very well, you have said. What are the statistics? Nigerians, most of the graduates that populate, even your media, the media industry, the journalism, mass communication industry, are our products. Many of the banks today in information communication technology are our graduates. Yearly, we turn out graduates from these countries, universities and polytechnics. They serve in the Youth Corps, National Youth Service Corps, and they perform very well. There have been no adverse comments against our graduates. What companies do is that they take these graduates, they use them, and knowing very well that the following year they will get more graduates, they abandon such people. I'm yet to see where we have our approach. Many of the entrepreneurial companies being formed and developed in the country today are people by our graduates who couldn't get employment elsewhere. There is no doubt that the environment, the socio-economic factors affect every individual in this country. It has to affect all the graduates as well. But many of them break through, and they do very well. In the case of having to retrain people, what professional area does not retrain people after they are produced as graduates? To do medicine or law in the United States or Canada, you first have to be a graduate. To be a teacher in Canada, you first have to be a graduate. Those universities that produce graduates in various fields, accountancy, medicine, engineering, after your graduation, you do pupillage, you do some residency, and so on and so forth. So there are not everything that you teach a student in the university. They get the fundamentals and the basics and the integrity. They are allowed to understand their environment and appreciate them. And then they go out with the parameters and whatever they have to change the environment. So this criticism that our educational system is falling, that our products are not doing very well, is not correct. Should not be encouraged. Otherwise, the investments in education our governments and individuals make would be a useless venture. And let me tell you, it's not only in the university system that people migrate out. In other spheres of endeavor, in business, whatever, people migrate outside this country. They change businesses. So that is it. And for our academic people who are accused of changing jobs and so on and so forth, it's natural in an environment, in a democratic system, people have options to change positions where they feel they may get better exposure or better life and so on and so forth. In the same way as a former Vice Chancellor of Nnamdi Azikiwe University, I had to struggle with the population of experts and professionals who want to come and teach and work in the university. Our universities, particularly many of our old, well-developed universities, do not lack professionals. They are.
Okay, Professor Egboka, we'll pause the Enugu Network Center in the meantime and then return to our Abuja studios here where we have Mr. Odia Ofemo. Odia, you heard Professor Egboka. Do you have any point of disagreement or concurrence, with what is said?
I'm actually a little amused by what I heard because, you see, I expected him to defend, so to say, his stuff. And he has done it rather well. But it is not well enough for anyone who would want the Nigerian educational system to leap a little further forward than what the existing system allows. The university that Egboka attended is certainly not the same kind of university that he ran. True, we now have so many more people in universities that the facilities cannot cover. But that's precisely the problem, that because of the nature of this, because of the setting, it is impossible to deliver knowledge in the way that universities used to. The University of Ibadan that I attended is 4 times superior to the ones that children are attending. The professors may be writing longer papers, but they are not papers that are as readable as the one, for instance, that Billy Dudley would write. Anyone who wants to understand Nigerian politics today still goes back to Dudley. That is where theory and a sense of the practice of politics made sense as a science. And I can tell you, in virtually every other area, the brilliant people are those who did a self-development scheme beyond what the university was able to provide. If you found journalists who entered a newspaper or a newsroom, when they get into those newspapers and newsrooms, you will see that they were de-educated by their universities. 6 months later, after the editors have done the job they need to do on those kids, they are brilliant. That is when you realize that universities are not doing it the way they used to. But more important for me is that in the area of the sciences, no, you actually meet kids who are out of the ordinary, but who were generally de-educated by the university they attended. Many of them, when they go abroad, are sometimes made to repeat their first degree courses, because those universities, especially when they see students who are genuinely good, would want them to go back to the basics they had missed. I mean, I met a student in Oxford who had a first class in Nigeria and had to be made to repeat a first degree course. Look, it's sometimes embarrassing when you see it happening. But when a university in Nigeria is criticized in that manner, I think those who work in universities should be careful not to overreact, because the facilities available that they have to deploy are not as good as the ones that the parents of these very children encountered. And the habits and attitudes to work are no longer the way they used to be.
Yeah, well, Odia, as you very well know, some of you also will be familiar with this. We've had ongoing intervention by the Tertiary Education Trust Fund to remedy these deficits to which you have spoken about. And I think that this is a matter that I would like to put you on pause also in the meantime, because as we announced at the beginning of the program, we are going over now to the Lagos Network Center to take our third guest on this conversation. If the Lagos Network Center just comes on the screen now, right there is on your screen, Professor Akin Oyebode. He's a kindred, of course, of Odia Ofemo. Professor Akin Oyebode is also a former Vice Chancellor at Ado-Ekiti. He's a professor of jurisprudence and international law, Harvard trained, of course, and also at Osgood in Toronto. Professor Akin Oyebode, my pleasure to welcome you to Good Morning Nigeria.
Thank you very much, Kingsley.
What we are discussing has to do with the role of the intellectual in Nigeria since independence, and what could also be on the agenda for them. We have with us here in Abuja Mr. Odia Ofemo, whom you know very well, and also your brother, Professor Boniface Egboka, who is speaking to us from the Enugu Network Center. What, in your opinion, has been the role of the intellectual in Nigeria, and what has happened that there appears, as I said earlier, the intellectual variety appears to be in recession, at least in the current democratic dispensation?
Quite frankly, the role of the intellectuals, like Antonio Gramsci put it, has been to be a manufacturer of ideas. And I think Professor Egboka and Odia, my good friend, captured that role. I think intellectuals in Nigeria, you say, are in a sort of recess because it appears the Nigerian society itself does not tolerate speaking truth.
Okay, Professor Oyebode, sorry, we're having some challenges with our link up to the Lagos Network Center. There's some glitch. Is it okay if it's okay, we'll get back to you to continue. We're not hearing you, and so can we...
And then, of course, we engage in public service. So that if you talk of intellectuals out of society, they try to survive, and because of the urge and the pressure on them to survive, they've given room for what you can call Philistinism. What are they thinking? People want to survive, and because of that, not serious effort is put into thinking. You say we have to learn to think about thinking, and respect those who make their life thinking, business of thinking. Managerially, I think Professor Ebuka pointed out that our products have generally performed, not just the NYSC. I was rather tickled by what Odia said about a student in Oxford who graduated first class. I was in Oxford 2 years ago, and I've met Nigerian students in Oxford, and they were not complaining about their preparation. In fact, one of the students was so happy that he attended the University of Lagos, and he said he would not want the name of the university to be changed because he's doing very well. He came with the first class in political science. He's doing a PhD. I hope it's not the same student that Odia said was being compared to repeat courses. Now, some of our graduates have gone elsewhere to the finest universities in the world and have not been found wanting. So I don't understand where this is coming from, that we are the larger society. So we cannot be an ivory tower. In fact, we are more tower than ivory in today's world. And because of the exponential increase in numbers, the quality of pedagogy maybe has suffered a bit. I remember when I joined the University of Lagos 41 years ago, my tutorial classes were just maybe 15 or 16. Today, we don't even have facilities. Far high numbers of students. What is called now in Nigeria, the carrying capacity of the universities have been exceeded. But when you're talking of intellectuals in terms of leadership, I think we have to blame the government. People have said the government has been doing a lot. I don't understand what people are saying in that line. We now have 140 or thereabout universities in Nigeria. But
Okay, gentlemen, we have, as I said, 3 guests who are speaking to us simultaneously: Enugu Network Center, Lagos Network Center, and the Abuja Network Center. We can be here for the next several hours, knowing the gentlemen that we have. But let's quickly now look at some agenda setting function, and to set this, to set the ball rolling, I would like us to recall what happened some decades ago, where you used to have very robust intellectual engagements, whether we should have structural adjustment program or otherwise, or whether it was to provide intellectual justification for military rule, as used to be the case in this country, or whether somebody was talking about Ataturk of Turkey, or whether you were talking about the generals of Korea, South Korea, and what they were doing and how we could do the same. Now, in our current democratic dispensation, there is no doubt about it. The 3 speakers that we've had would seem to be in acknowledgement that, yes, intellectuals are in all kinds of antagonistic pursuits, trying to survive, as Odia himself has very well illustrated. How, therefore, do we get the intellectual back into the business of being, as Professor Oyebode said, a manufacturer of ideas that would assist us in our current democratic dispensation, which is not just democracy for its sake, but to put us on a much sounder footing for national development. We'll begin with Odia in Abuja here.
Wait, sir, I'm sorry. Like
yes.
You said, when he said the manufacturer of ideas, I was going to ask him, unfortunately, it's gone up. How relevant are those ideas to our situation today?
Today, yes. Let's begin with Odia.
It's a great question, and that was where I started, by noting Lugard's intellectual survey. There are two Nigerians in the past 100, two practitioners of the business in Nigeria in the past 100, or to really go back a little in order to know how to move forward. It's Obafemi Awolowo. Those are two Nigerians who wrote books that will always be relevant to a discussion of Nigeria's past, present, and future. And when I was presenting the two books, This Conference Must Be Different and Taking Nigeria Seriously, I was virtually cloning a position that Chief Awolowo always took. It is not a question of whether you attended a university or did not attend a university. It is about what you make of ideas in relation to the kind of future that you want a society to have. That is to say, we need to have the capacity to describe that future before we move into it. In the writings that I do, these are the things that concern me. But as I said, it is no longer quite the case that you have an audience in Nigeria that responds in the way people used to respond to intellectual ideas. Many Nigerians go to university. The moment they are out, they forget the idea of buying books. If you don't buy books, you do not support the spine with which intellectuals practice. And there is the other issue. Of course, there are already social disjunctions. Like, for instance, universities that would not have the kind of libraries that I had in the university I attended. And I don't know any of the professors who would say that that is not true. The universities do not have the kind of libraries. We now have a book city in Port Harcourt. It is a city in which there is no proper library, no proper bookshop, no proper publishing house. Of course, we hope that the governor, before he leaves power, will set those things in place, build a proper theater, so that although we call it a book city in advance, we can have something better. But I want to say something very quickly. In terms of how we move into the future, it is about intellectuals, that is to say, not necessarily university-based, engaging social problems and looking at the future beyond what we used to do. People, we are looking at roles, how to move into cities. Let us start entering the cities and building the cities. The books I do aim at such. And I want to say that Professor Yebode actually can be fitted into this train of people who are not just on the road going to the city. They have entered the city and they are interested in how cities are properly built and what makes cities work. Every governor who comes to power in Nigeria and starts by saying, I would manufacture, I would produce all the things that my people consume within the next 4 years and goes after it, is actually working for the future. The fact that governors don't do so today and are not trying to reduce our dependence on externalities is part of the crisis.
Well, Odia Ofemo, you've raised some very important points, some of them of historical import. And we do hope that our other guests at the Lagos Network Center and the Enugu Center, will have the opportunity of responding to you, which was, of course, the question that I raised. But we are going over now to the Benin Network Center, where we are being joined by Professor Eddie Eragbe. Professor Eddie Eragbe, of course, is a professor of history, and so it's quite fitting for us to welcome Professor Eragbe and to take off from that historical perspective that Lord Lugard was an intellectual who worked for the benefit of his country. And Chief Obafemi Awolowo, according to Odia Ofemo, also says was an intellectual in politics and in government. What's your take on this, and how do we set the agenda to have greater intellectual content into our national problems today and then have the best way forward?
Well, thank you very much, my dear friend Osadolo. It's my pleasure to be with you again. I am quite thrilled by the submissions that have been made by our professors and, of course, the contributor from Abuja. The fact remains that, for once again, we are bringing to the fore the importance of history in our country. And what we have always witnessed for a time now is that in trying to deal with our problems, we think that they are new, whereas history is a repository of most of the movements and developments that have already taken place, and we have things to learn from that. From what has been said so far, and also my own take on this role of the intellectuals from the historical perspective, we must look at our country, and that is, of course, bearing in mind that we are not living in isolation. we are interacting with other parts of the world. And of course, today I'm hearing a celebration of Lord Lugard. It's a great thing to happen because up to now, the tendency has been that everyone has been criticizing what they termed the mistake that was made by Lord Lugard in bringing us together in 1914. So the intellectual input coming from Ofemu, Dr. there, concerning the fact that Lord Lugard was more of an administrator and had ideas about what they had to do and had the agenda that he had to perform for Britain. And today, we are dealing with what he has given to us. One of the beauties of things that happened at the National Conference, where I happen to have been, and of course the professor from Lagos was also there, was that most of these issues of our national development were so deeply looked into, and the recommendations are there as to how really, based on our historical experience, where we could really be going as a nation. And we are thrilled also that Mr. President is believing that recommendations that have come out from there will also be implemented, and let's see how Nigeria will really be. For me, I believe that sometimes armchair analysts are not trying to deride what is going on in our institutions. The fact remains that Nigerian intellectuals are holding their own anywhere in the world. There is no professor in this country that can be made a professor without publications that are there in the foreign journals and publications. They have to check. There is a percentage of foreign publications that must be there. There must be national publications. There must be what you call local publications, because you cannot just be publishing outside without your peers in the country looking at what you are doing. So when sometimes we are saying that our universities have gone down, the intellectuals are no longer performing, that is not quite correct. I studied at the University of Benin for my first degree and second. Later, I studied at Boston University as a Fulbright scholar. Nigerians are still out there from our universities that are holding their own. One thing that I think is happening well now with our democracy, and that is the way to go, is that the government is, in quote, patronizing the intellectual community. There are many advisors at the professorial cadre, academic cadre, and all. But sometimes we trivialize what we really call a special advisor. What we are saying when you are talking of an assistant. Sometimes the people that are giving those jobs don't have the capacity to actually advise. Because when you're having a thinking cabinet for you, the brain trust of an administration, they don't need to be seen most times, but they are the ones that when issues are there to be analyzed, you go to them, you consult with them and all. And I think there is a tendency emerging gradually where such consultations are going on. So for us to really keep moving on, I will recommend again that there should be a greater patronage of those that have the experience, those that have really been there, whether in the ivory towers or wherever they are, that we know have the knowledge and we know they have something to contribute to our country. So for us as a people, what history is teaching us is that no country can depend on itself alone. You must interrogate other nations. Just yesterday, my colleague, a senior colleague, Professor Toide, delivered a paper in his inaugural where he tried to x-ray the decisions that we took about Bakassi. Sometimes I believe that the real problem is that even when ideas are being generated, those that are supposed to use them don't use them. And that is the question of who is in charge of the political terrain that we are operating now. The fact is that if you look at, with due respect to those in government, a good number of those that are trying to get to our National Assembly, trying to get to our House of Assembly, even those that want to be governors, with due respect to some of them, they have not really understood what the Nigerian problems are.
Okay, Prof, you did say that many times, and I think we are quite correct, you, the intellectuals or those who know, you generate the ideas, but at the end of the day, these ideas are not utilized. And I'm at a loss when we say things like this. Are we going to fold our arms and just give up? Yes, you have good ideas and you put them forward, but as intellectuals, can't we find a more proactive way to get these ideas to be utilized for the good of this country?
Yes, of course. The point we're trying to make is that those in government, when we mean those in government, policy implement, that is the people that have the power, that have the mandate, they have to really look to our universities, look to our polytechnics, look to these people that are well established, that have these ideas and utilize them. Because at the end of the day, we are trying to create a better country for all of us. And so what I am saying is that the ideas are there. It is whether we are taking them. And of course, we are hoping that as this democracy is growing, that more will come from even the intellectual community to be part of governance. And so that it's no longer just generating ideas, but if you have the opportunity, you can put them to use. One of the greatest governors we had in this country, all of us know, happened to have been the Professor Ambrose Ali of then Bender State. His legacies are staring us in the face in the great things he did within the short time he was in government. But such people don't always come up the way we expect them to be. In Edo State, for example, we have a governor that in terms of his intellectual robustness, in his ability to engage issues, you see that in Nigerians, just like the prof was saying at the time, that is the professor from Oka, that it is not just in universities you find these people, they are all over in Nigeria. And what we are saying is let us look better when we are giving mandate to people that at the end of the day, it is not just the belly infrastructure issues that we talk about that determine those that get into positions of governance, those that advise governance, but people that we believe can bring about a change in our country.
Yes, yes. So why do our intellectuals shy away from politics? You have just rightly said it now. You come up with ideas, but those who are in politics or who are in governance don't maybe utilize these ideas, and there's the need for more intellectuals or those in the academics to go into politics. So what do we need to do, or how are we going to get the intellectuals to come out more, to be involved in the governance and the polity of the country?
Well, of course, like I said at the beginning, there is a trend emerging which should be encouraged, which is that we may not all have to be governors, but if you have the opportunity, there is a governor that believes, a president that believes that ideas are important to change our country, they have to continue to engage them. The right question you've asked, and we've done papers on this, why is it that intellectuals, women, many don't get into politics in Nigeria? It is that for now, the terrain is rough. We cannot run away from that. The terrain is rough. And it's rough to the extent that there is an element of desperation in those that are in the political arena. So we don't sometimes get jealous about them because we have an insight into the kind of hurdles, the struggles, the sacrifices they have to make to get to those positions. But what is important is that if we start having a change of as a mindset, as a nation, not just the people that are there now, as a nation, then even those we give the mandate to, we should know about their background. I give you a small example. In the United States, when Woodrow Wilson became the president, he was a professor before he came to that position. Today, we are lucky, let's put it that way, that even the president of our country happens to be one of the products from the university system. And I must say that at the age of 54 for Nigeria, I'm one of those that looking at where we are coming from, I'm not so despondent. I don't feel so terrible about the progress we've made. I believe we are making some steady progress, but there is room for greater improvement. And at the end of the day, the way the intellectuals must go in terms of whether they can get into politics is for those of them that are bold enough to say, yes, these are my ideas, I want to go and test them. But you must start selling yourself before you want to go there. It's not just because people may not know the ideas that you have. That is one of the advantages that programs like this really afford people to speak out. Go and give public lectures. When they invite you, address seminars organized by labor and many. And at the end of the day, people will know the kind of ideas that you have that can really bring about transformation and change in our country.
Okay, Professor Edi Aragbe, Professor of History at the University of Benin, we won't be coming back to you. I mean, I would like to thank you in the meantime for your very illuminating contributions. And just to illustrate further, the example you gave about intellectuals or academics going to, excuse me, become special advisors or special assistants. I once was reading a blog. It was a conversation about a professor who is a special assistant. And one of those ignorant comments was, I'm saying this in pidgin now, Naso Honga Kacham Rich. Apparently, there was no deep appreciation of the amount of work that is required as a special assistant to contribute to the success of his principal. But we go over now back again to the Enugu Center, Enugu Network Center, where we have had Professor Boniface Egboka. We've paused him for a while. Professor Egboka, we're looking again now in terms of agenda setting. How do we accentuate the intellectual content, have a marriage, as it were, between the intellectuals and the political class at whatever level, local government, state level, and the federal level? Professor Egboka.
Thank you very much. If we may continue the discourse, particularly from Professor Edi from Benin, our intellectuals, we have to accept them. We have to encourage them. We have to realize the importance of their intellectual property, their intellectual versatility. Everyone cannot be the president. Only one person can be the president of Nigeria. Everyone cannot be a governor. Only one person can be a governor, and so on and so forth. But these officials are like a giant philosophical masquerade. Some people lead them. Some people direct them. Some people guide them. You find that the presidential group, the governor group, they have people working for them. Many a time you find many intellectuals involved. There have been many of our professors and lecturers and the people from far and near who have been involved in governance, either, as you said, advisors or ministers or commissioners. When they get into this position, and many of them also are senators or members of the Federal or State House of Reps, when these intellectuals get into these positions, they should be courageous. They should be as courageous as Odi Efemon in the positive direction. Whatever ideas that are generated, they should insist on getting them implemented at the loss of their job or at the cost for some personal inconveniences. The problem is usually that many of our intellectuals, as already stated in this discussion, have the ideas published and exposed and leave them to collect dust. When you have, I can give you a humble example of myself. I was an elected member of the 1988-89 Constituent Assembly. In that place, we had so many intellectuals, and we formed committees and made sure we had the bills and the laws that were affecting the rule of Nigerians, the effect of Nigerians. And we made sure that those laws are passed. Intellectuals should not be afraid. They should use their experience they have garnered over the years and impress it on our governance. We know that our governments are in charge of our socioeconomic lives and so on and so forth. They manage our security, they manage our economic resources, and so on and so forth.
Okay, well, Professor Boniface Egboka, former Vice Chancellor, Nnamdi Azikiwe University, Awka. Of course, he spoke to us from the Enugu Network Center. I would like to thank you for being with us on the program this morning. We are signing off now from the Enugu Network Center and going over, of course, to the Lagos Network Center, where we have still in the studios there Professor Akin Oyebode, former Vice Chancellor at Ado-Ekiti, and of course is a Professor of Jurisprudence and International Law. Professor Oyebode, wrap up from you. In terms of agenda setting, how do we manufacture the great ideas that should engage all of us, particularly the key political actors, and drive us to a higher level of development?
Kingsley, I think the key is to listen to our opinion makers, those who think for society. But you see, only the deep can call to the deep. If the people that we are speaking to are allergic to novel ideas, then we might not make progress. I think there's a place for intellectuals in Nigeria, and Nigeria has recognized the role of intellectuals. If you take the Babangida cabinet, for instance, it was suffused with intellectuals. And I think even today, we have intellectuals in power, either as governor, deputy governor, president, vice president, name it. We are all around. But what we have seen is a leadership deficit in Nigeria. And the cure for this leadership deficit is not for the intellectuals to leave or abandon the ivory tower and seek political power. Remember, during the Paris Commune, Karl Marx was in the British Museum. He didn't go to the barricade. The academics or intellectuals should continue to think and produce the ideas, hoping that, just like the parable of the sower, you spread the seed, hoping that some will fall on fertile ground and germinate and give rise to real transformation, not paper transformation. I think that is the way to go.
Yeah, leadership deficit. And I'm sure we have that within the universities too. How are we addressing the leadership deficit in the universities?
Interesting question. The vice chancellor is like the president in any university. But you see, the vice chancellor doesn't govern the university alone. A leader is as good as the men and women around him. Like Professor Egboka said, there can be only one vice chancellor at a time, but he is just first among equals. And he must exude sufficient self-confidence. He must have a game plan. He must have a vision of where he wants to drive the university within his tenure. The same thing applies for Nigeria, okay? The leadership must have an idea, a vision, a dream of where they envisage Nigeria will be in the next 10, 20 years. In other words, look at the Asian tigers. Look at how society has been transformed. Go to China. The foundation laid by Chairman Mao, followed on by successive leaders, has put China where it is today.
Okay, Professor Akin Oyebode, speaking to us from the Lagos Network Center, would like to thank you for participating in this very interesting conversation. So we're signing you off now. We do hope you enjoy the rest of your weekend. Thank you for being with us. Okay, we're back now to the Abuja studios where we still have right with us Odia Ofemo. Anthony, I'm sure you have a question to pop for him.
I'm sure you will be able to give us an insight into what, but I would have loved to ask some of the professors that have gone off. Somebody had wanted to know in a discussion that if these intellectuals go into politics, won't it corrupt them? Wouldn't they get sucked in, just like we are talking about the political class, how all the kind of things we are complaining about them? If the academia goes into politics, what is going to become of academics?
I think we need to make a distinction between two kinds of intellectuals in this regard. There are those who are just count and number intellectuals. They can count, yes, 3 cars passed today. But we are talking about those who are proactive in terms of the ideas they express. When we talk of intellectuals in Nigeria, we still remember the Bala Osmans, the Olaonins, the Chikeobis. Even when they moved into the political realm, they still continued to promote the ideas they believed in. Yeah. Very many Nigerian intellectuals mortgaged their capacity to think to the World Bank, to governments in power, so that the fear of being different has actually molded their capacity to do anything right. In fact, when we are discussing how the university system has plunged, it is not so much that the old books they read are no longer available. It's simply that what they make of the books that they still read is no longer what the kind of intellectuals we had in the past made of the books they read. My take on it is that you know an intellectual by production. If you looked at what they did at the last national conference, you will find that almost all the issues that were in previous national conferences were rejigged. There was actually an advance on almost all the preceding conferences. The reason that happened, I must say, is also because of the way the president arranged and brought together people who could not help but have a proper intellectual engagement. That national conference solved more problems than previous ones because of all the preceding conferences. Don't let us forget that. A lot of thinking has been going into Nigerian practice of intellectualism. And it culminated in that last conference, which in my view is like the apogee of precisely what the Nigerian mind can afford. But I want to say this. Nigerians are constantly producing ideas. What we have not done is to link these ideas to political organizations that remain steadfast, that will not abandon the ideas.
On that note, would like to we have been told that the time is up, and we're going to other segments of the program. Odia Ofemo would like to thank you for being with us. Just one point before you go, and this is not a question. You keep talking about the state of libraries. I say that this is the best time to actually be a student. From any smartphone, you can access any journal. In those days, there used to be hard copies, but these days, E-copies. I have been a student just some years ago, and I knew how easy it was for me to research. Audio FMO would like to thank you. This is Good Morning Nigeria. We'll take a break now. When we return, we'll go to other segments of our program. Yes.
Running on the network service of the NTA.